in the hush of the golden savanna where the sky pressed down like a warm hand, and the trees whispered in languages only the old spirits could understand. Something stirred beneath the red earth. Not an animal, not a wind, not even a shadow, but something deeper. A presence, a smirk in the soil, a wink in the wind. The trickster was near. In a quiet village named Ogundel, nestled between two mighty rivers and shaded by ancient baobabs, the elders sat in their circle of silence, smoking pipes that puffed like slow thunderclouds. Children played with dust, their laughter light as bird feathers. Hunters returned from the forest with tales of strange echoes and misplaced tracks, while the women hummed songs older than memory as they stirred pots of thick, spicy stew. And that day, as dusk yawned across the sky, a child was born under a crooked moon. The midwife gasped not because of the child's appearance, but because of the air, the way it bent around him. It shimmered with something unsaid, like a question waiting to be asked. The baby had eyes like polished obsidian, calm and watchful, yet mischievously alive. The moment he cried out, a breeze stirred every flame in the village. Candles danced, fire pits crackled, smoke drifted in shapes that curled and twisted, spelling names no one could read. His mother, Adiola, named him Eshu. From the beginning, Eshu was odd. He didn't cry when hungry, but only when too quiet. He didn't crawl forward, he crawled in circles. And when he began to talk, it wasn't just to people. He whispered to stones, chatted with trees, and once had a long and serious conversation with a basket of yams. The village chuckled and said, "He's touched by the old gods." But no one truly understood just how deep that touch ran. By the time he was 6, Eshu could vanish and appear again before a blink. He'd steal a fisherman's hat, only to return it balanced perfectly atop the village goat. He once replaced the chief's walking stick with a live snake that acted stiff, until the chief leaned on it. Eshu's laughter rang out over the village. Rooftops wild, full, never mean, always unexpected. And yet, there was wisdom to him too. In the quiet moments, when the sky turned purple and the drums stilled, Eshu would sit at the foot of the storyteller, Baba Oloy, and ask questions with a child's voice but an elder's curiosity. "Baba," he asked one evening, "if all roads lead somewhere, where does the one that goes in a circle lead?" Baba Oloy smiled slowly, revealing teeth like worn ivory. "It leads back to yourself, child." Eshu nodded solemnly. "Then that must be the path I'm on." As Eshu grew, so did his legend. Animals began to follow him. A crow perched on his shoulder and never left. A monkey once danced behind him, mimicking his every move. He could make a chicken cluck backwards, and once convinced a waterfall to flow sideways for a day. The elders were torn between worry and wonder. The village priest, Oren, often said, "He is not just a boy. He is the crossroad. All things turn when he turns." And indeed, it was true. Wherever Eshu walked, things changed. Two neighbors who had hated each other for decades suddenly shared a meal. A barren woman dreamed of rivers and found herself with child. Even the trees bloomed in odd seasons when Eshu passed. But not all were pleased. In the dark corners of the forest, in places maps did not name, the old spirits stirred. Not the kind that walked with humans, but the ones who had been forgotten. Spirits of decay, silence, and stillness. The ones who hated change. They whispered among themselves, "The boy is a thorn. He dances where silence should sit. He brings the future where the past still rules. He must be turned." And so they watched. One night, Eshu had a dream. He stood at a great crossroads, one path of fire, one of water, one of wind, and one of stone. A figure waited there, not old, not young, with a face that shifted like sand. The figure spoke without speaking. You must choose, little one. The path is not given, it is made. Eshu replied. What if I walk them all? The figure grinned. Then you are already the trickster. He awoke with the scent of incense in his nose and sand on his feet. From that day forward, Eshu changed. Still playful, still wild, but now quieter, too. He listened to the wind. He traced symbols in the dirt. He began crafting small objects from bone, feather, and string charms that shimmered with meanings unspoken. He buried them at corners, under trees, beside doorsteps. The villagers began to whisper, some with reverence, some with fear. But Baba Aloy called him one afternoon beneath the banyan tree. Child, the old man said, do you know what you are? Eshu shrugged. A question, I think. The old man laughed. No, you are the answer wrapped in mischief. The path no one dares walk, but all must cross. You are the keeper of choices. Eshu bowed low. Then it's time I go where the road curves. And so, at the age of 13, Eshu left Ogundal. No fanfare, no drums, only a quiet hush, as if the village itself held its breath. He walked barefoot, with the crow on his shoulder and a pouch of charms at his side. The world opened before him, markets bustling with merchants, forests thick with mystery, mountains that breathed clouds. At every crossroad, Eshu left a mark. Sometimes a joke, sometimes a lesson, sometimes just confusion, but always, always a choice. He helped a poor farmer turn his fields fertile by convincing the river to change its path. He taught a warrior how to defeat his enemies by making them laugh too hard to fight. He once painted the moon red for a week, just to see who would dance. But he also angered kings, puzzled priests, and turned order upside down, because that was his path. Not chaos for chaos's sake, but mischief with meaning. A path of cracked mirrors and strange reflections, a road paved with riddles. And somewhere in the distance, the forgotten spirits watched still. But now they whispered less, because something was changing, something they could not stop. A myth was being reborn, and his name was Eshu. The sun hung low, casting twin shadows upon the red dust of the savannah. Eshu, barefoot as always, walked with his arms behind his back, the curved staff in his hand tapping softly against the earth. He had followed the smoke trails to a strange little village nestled between two hills, one dark with trees that whispered even when no wind blew, and one bare as a bone, white with sand and bleached stone. It was said that this place was watched over by two spirits, one that saw the truth, and one that saw only lies. Eshu's eyes sparkled with interest. He adored duality. Nothing pleased him more than a contradiction wrapped in a mystery and dipped in mischief. The villagers, at first glance, seemed normal. They greeted him with suspicious eyes, wary of strangers, but not hostile. Women carried pots on their heads, and children peeked from behind thick woven doors. But as Eshu stepped deeper into the village, he noticed the peculiarity. Every person in the village cast not one, but two shadows. One followed them as expected, a dark mirror of their movements, but the second did not. The second shadow wandered independently, oddly delayed, sometimes even hesitating before catching up. And strangest of all, some villagers' second shadows whispered. He heard it for the first time when he passed an old woman stirring a pot of yams. Her first shadow moved as it should, but her second leaned forward and muttered, "He lied about the goat." Eshu paused. The old woman looked up and smiled at him with innocent eyes. "Good traveler," she said, "would you like something warm to fill your belly?" Eshu smiled his crooked smile. "Only if it comes with a story. What is this place? Why do your shadows talk?" The old woman blinked and laughed. "Shadows talk? No, no. You're just tired from the road. Rest a while." But Eshu was not tired. He accepted the yam, sat beside her, and watched. The second shadow turned its head toward him again and whispered, "She keeps secrets in the jar behind her." Now that was something. Eshu was a trickster, yes, but also a seeker. He did not like being lied to unless he was the one telling the lie. So when the old woman went inside to fetch water, he tiptoed behind the cooking hut and found the jar. It was heavy and sealed with beeswax. A quick crack of his staff opened it. Inside, bones, tiny bones. Not goat, not chicken, human, a child's. He closed the jar, resealed it, and sat back down, chewing the yam as though nothing had happened. When the woman returned, he thanked her kindly and walked on. But his smile had thinned. He realized then, the second shadows were not shadows at all, they were echoes. Echoes of truth. Or perhaps guilt. As Eshu wandered the village, he saw more such things. A young man helping his father stack logs, while his second shadow shouted. He stole the spear. He blamed his brother, a merchant selling spices. His second shadow shaking its head, whispering, "This powder makes people ill." No one seemed to notice these second shadows except Eshu. And perhaps they couldn't. They lived with them so long, they forgot they were even there. He stopped in the middle of the village square, where the two hills met and a massive baobab tree grew, its roots tangled like secrets. There, an elder sat weaving baskets. His two shadows sat calmly, but the second one stared directly at Eshu. "You see them, don't you?" the elder asked without looking up. Eshu chuckled. "And they see me." The old man nodded. "This village is cursed, or blessed, depending on your view. Long ago, we made a deal with the gods of honesty. We wanted to know truth from lies, to root out betrayal, to live without deception. So they gave us to shadows, one for our steps and one for our truths. But now we are all haunted by the things we cannot take back. And yet," Eshu said, twirling his staff, "you still lie. The shadows scream it, because we are human," the elder said, "and we would rather bury truth than live beside it." Eshu felt a twitch in his chest. He did not like rules. He did not like truths that shackled people more than lies did. Perhaps this village needed shaking. Perhaps these shadows needed new tales. He stood and called out to the villagers. Slowly, they gathered, cautious and curious. Eshu raised his staff and planted it in the red earth. "I am Eshu," he declared, "trickster of the crossroads. I bring choice. I bring change." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some dropped to their knees. Others looked fearful. "I bring you a game," Eshu continued. "One of shadows." They whispered among themselves. Games with tricksters were never safe. "One of you," he said, "has done something terrible. Your second shadow screams it. But I will offer a path, one that might lead to forgiveness. Or freedom." He raised his hand, and the second shadows, all at once, stood upright, no longer tied to the feet of their people. They stood beside them, independent. The villagers cried out in terror. "They will now walk beside you until your truths are spoken." Eshu said, "One by one, you must confess your heaviest lie. Only then will the second shadow vanish." But a young girl said, trembling, What if the lie is too dark? Eshu smiled gently. Then the shadow will stay. He turned and walked away from the gathering, toward the dark forested hill. Behind him, the cries of the village began, some confessing, some refusing, some running. Second shadows walking beside them like ghosts with unfinished business. As he reached the edge of the trees, the elder's voice called after him. Why do you do this, trickster? Eshu did not turn round. Because truth, like me, likes to play. And he vanished into the trees, his own single shadow dancing behind him. In the humid stillness of dawn, the sky above the village of orange shimmered like a drumskin, stretched tight with secrets. Palm trees swayed slowly, their fronds whispering gossip no one dared repeat aloud. Eshu, his staff slung across his shoulder and a grin lurking at the edge of his lips, entered the great market that only appeared once every 7th moon, the market of mirrored faces. This was no ordinary gathering of vendors. The market, hidden between two breaths of reality, shifted like smoke. One moment it seemed to be rooted in the red earth of Yorubaland, and the next it rippled into the spirit realm, where sound bent and time blinked like a firefly. Eshu, of course, belonged in both places. He had walked crossroads since the first story was told, and now he moved among stalls where no item was what it seemed. A pot of palm oil whispered to a bowl of yams. Strings of beads rearranged themselves to spell out truths no ear should hear. Even the ground beneath his feet vibrated with possibilities. He passed a woman selling baskets of shadows, not the things that clung to your heels in sunlight, but the discarded memories of those who had made the wrong choice at the right time. A boy tried to sell Eshu his own name, unknowing that the trickster had once worn that very name like a cloak. Every vendor here traded in the surreal, the symbolic, and the sorrowful, and each one greeted Eshu with a nod, not of respect, but of wariness. Careful, hissed a pot to another as he walked past. The god of the forked tongue walks. Eshu chuckled and adjusted his red cap, the color flickering between crimson and jet depending on who looked. He strolled toward the center, where an old man squatted on a mat of braided hair. Before him sat a box, small, plain, carved from a single piece of ebony wood. The box hummed low and deep, like the voice of a storm before it breaks. I see you still guard the box, Baba Aya, Eshu said, his voice like honey spiced with fire. Baba Aya's eyes opened slowly. They were mismatched, one gold, one blue. And I see you still metal, child of crossroads. He rasped. The box was older than most gods. It was said to contain a question that had never been asked, or an answer that should never be known. No one had opened it, not even Baba Aya, but Eshu's fingers twitched toward it all the same. Why do you come? Baba asked, his hand resting protectively atop the box. The Eshu grinned. To see myself. At once, the market shifted. Mirrors cracked and reformed in the corners of stalls. The air grew dense, syrup thick. The mirrored faces of the market, merchants, animals, spirits, all turned toward him. Each mirror reflected not Eshu as he was, but Eshu as others believed him to be. One showed him laughing and cruel, dancing barefoot over the ruins of broken oaths. Another painted him noble, tragic, cast aside by those who feared change. Yet another showed him as a child, clutching a staff too big for his hands, eyes wide and searching. He turned slowly, watching his selves flicker in and out of view. Which one is me? He asked aloud. None, said Baba Aya. And all? Wind rose, whirling dust and petals into spirals. From the wind came a woman, tall and wrapped in gold cloth that whispered old riddles. Her name was Nria, a seer with no past. She walked without leaving footprints. You seek to trick the market, Eshu, she said, but the market sees through you. He bowed playfully. I trick nothing. I merely reveal what is already true. Nria moved to the box and placed her fingers on its edge. Baba Aya did not stop her. She spoke, eyes closed. The market has decided. A test is needed. Eshu's smile faltered. Just a flicker, a shadow of hesitation. From the center of the market rose a figure. It wore no face, only a mask that changed constantly. Laughing, weeping, snarling, serene. This was the masked one, a spirit of consequence. It stepped forward, each footstep ringing like a bell made of bone. You will walk the path of your own stories, it said. 3 truths, 3 lies. In the end, you will not know which is which. Eshu's eyes lit up like fireflies in a bottle. Finally, a riddle worth my time. The masked one waved its hand, and the market dissolved. He was alone. Alone in a clearing where red trees whispered names he had never spoken. Alone with a path stretching before him. A path with 3 forks, each marked by a figure from his past. At the first fork stood a mother, her back turned. She hummed an old lullaby, one Eshu barely remembered. The path she guarded smelled of rain and rebirth. At the second fork stood a man, bound in chains that bled fire. He had been tricked by Eshu long ago, in a tale no one dared to retell. The air around him pulsed with guilt and rage. At the third fork stood a mirror, just a mirror. Yet in it, Eshu saw himself, not as he was, but as he could have been, still, silent, kind. He stepped toward the mirror, then paused. He turned to the woman humming, then to the man in chains. Each choice was a truth, each one a lie. From behind, the voice of the masked one echoed, choose, and choose he did. But which path he walked, no one knows, not even Eshu, because in that moment, the market of mirrored faces folded itself back into the seams of the world, vanishing until the next 7th moon. And Eshu, the god of crossroads, walked onward, perhaps tricked, perhaps triumphant, all the while smiling, always smiling. In the heart of the endless savannah, where golden grass met the cobalt sky, Eshu's journey took a peculiar turn. After his mischief at the riverbanks and his whispered challenge to the gods, the crossroads trickster found himself before a place unlike any he had ever known, a forest that did not grow with time, but remembered it. The trees stood in a perfect circle, old and gnarled, bark blackened with age, roots curling in on themselves like knotted memories. This was the grove of echoes, where the spirits of those long-gone whispered truths few dared hear. Eshu paused at the edge of the grove. Even the wind held its breath. The path behind him, once warm with sun, now felt cold. This place, it was said, could show a man every lie he'd ever told, and demand he swallow them. But Eshu? He grinned. He walked forward barefoot, the soil under his feet cool and damp. The moment he stepped between the first 2 trees, the grove shifted. Not physically, no. The trees did not move, but the very feeling of the world tilted, as though reality itself had turned its head to watch him. The grove came alive not with sound, but with memory. Trickster, came a voice like dry leaves cracking underfoot. Why do you come? I follow no reason but my own, Eshu replied, unfazed. But I heard a whisper that the grove holds secrets even the gods ignore, and I am fond of secrets. Another voice joined in, high and childlike. Will you pay the price to see? Eshu smirked. I always do. And just like that, the world around him folded. The forest dimmed, the trees breathing like slumbering giants. Fog coiled around his ankles. From within it emerged himself, a younger Eshu, before he wore the red and black cloth, before his staff had carved stories into the dirt. The child Eshu ran circles around him, giggling. Remember this? The grove asked, as a memory bloomed like fire. He was in the market square, still a boy. He had swapped a merchant's goat for a bag of pebbles, and convinced the merchant that the goat had transformed into stones due to a curse. The villagers had laughed, the merchant had wept, and Eshu had felt powerful. That scene faded, only for another to rise. He saw a woman with eyes like dusk. She had begged for his help to find her missing son. Eshu, curious and bored, had promised assistance in exchange for a story. She told him the tale of her ancestors, and in return, he told her the wrong path to follow. The grove was showing him more than pranks. It was showing the weight of his laughter. Yet Eshu stood firm. Am I to weep for truth? He asked the grove, arms crossed. I am no god of pity. No, whispered the voices. You are a god of balance, and balance must be seen before it can be held. A new vision took shape, but this one Eshu did not recognize. He was older, his face weathered, his smile absent. He walked alone through a broken village, ashes in the air. Children stared at him from behind ruined walls. His name was whispered in bitterness, not reverence. Eshu, they said, the trickster who watched, as the gods argued and the mortals burned. The scene shook him. What is this? He demanded. A prophecy. The grove responded softly, a possibility. Should you forget that chaos unbound becomes suffering? Should you forget that laughter without care leaves silence in its wake? Eshu turned from the vision, and there stood a woman, old, her back bent, skin like woven bark. She wore no ornaments, no crown of leaves, but the power in her gaze was undeniable. I am Ialarisha, she said, the spirit mother of this grove. Every tale you've walked ripples into me. You've brought change. Eshu, but what do you bring now? He looked at her and, for once, did not smile. I bring myself. No more, no less. She stepped closer. Then come. Sit. They sat beneath the oldest tree, its trunk wide enough to hold generations of stories. I do not ask you to change, she said, only to understand. Eshu listened as she spoke of the thin line between trickery and tyranny, of the gift and curse of ambiguity, of crossroads not just as choices, but as echoes. What is chosen once may ripple forever. You are laughter, she said, but also language. You are mischief, but also messenger. Without your riddles, the world grows stiff, but too many riddles, and the path disappears. Eshu stared into the branches above, the leaves whispering his name. I hear you, he said quietly. When he rose to leave, the grove let out a sound like a sigh, not of relief, but of release. The fog parted, the path reformed, and Eshu stepped through the circle of trees once more. Outside the grove, the sun had not moved, but something inside Eshu had. He did not speak for a long while, not until he found a lone traveler on the road, weeping over a broken drum. Without a word, Eshu sat beside him and, from behind his back, pulled a new drum, its skin painted with the symbols of crossroads. He handed it to the man. When the traveler looked up, Eshu finally grinned. Consider it an echo. The jungle thickened around him. vines nodding tighter overhead as though the forest itself was preparing for something. Eshu strolled along the narrow, winding path with a gourd of palm wine in one hand and a sly grin curling his lips. His feet made no sound on the mossy floor, not because he stepped lightly, but because the land remembered him. Trees whispered his name in rustling leaves. Eshu, trickster, guide, troublemaker. He paused at a wall of flowering bushes, purple blooms like masks opening their mouths to yawn. Beyond them, almost hidden from sight, lay a village so old it didn't appear on any map, a place where silence hummed and shadows danced even at noon. The village of masks. Each hut in the village was adorned with masks, hundreds of them, some round-faced with bulging eyes, others long and narrow with protruding tongues or crescent brows. Carved from ebony, bone, or baobab bark, each mask told a story, or at least, they once did. As Eshu entered, not a single villager looked up. Children sat idly, their faces smeared with ochre, tracing lines in the dust. Elders muttered by fires that didn't crackle. The masks, too, seemed asleep. There was no laughter, no dance, no ceremony. Something was off. Eshu tilted his head. No welcome for an old friend. A young boy was the only one who met his eyes. The boy's mask was tilted on his forehead, a sun-shaped carving with faded red paint. "We don't dance anymore," he said flatly. Eshu's eyebrows lifted. "But why?" "The masks are your stories. They are the ancestors' breath-made wood. They're just decorations now," the boy replied. "The stories are gone." And the spirits stopped speaking. The trickster tapped the ground with his staff, carved in spirals that gleamed faintly. Spirits don't stop speaking. People just stop listening. He wandered to the center of the village, where the oldest and grandest mask stood, nearly as tall as a tree. It had many faces, a trickster's mask, in fact, smiling on one side, weeping on the other. Its paint was peeling, its eyes empty. He placed his palm on it. A thrum rolled beneath his feet like a heartbeat restarting. The wind picked up, swirling dust. The trees leaned inward. Eshu grinned. "Ah, so you are still here." From the mask's eye holes, a faint red glow sparked. A distant chant tickled the edges of the villagers' minds, tugging like a half-remembered lullaby. The elders looked up. The children stilled. But Eshu wasn't done. He knew the masks held spirits, some gentle, some playful, some wrathful, others downright petty. If the people wouldn't remember them, perhaps the spirits would remember the people. He strode to a row of masks hanging by an elder's hut and selected one shaped like a hyena. "Time to wake up," he whispered, slipping it over his face. The moment he did, his posture changed. Shoulders hunched, arms dangled like paws. A high-pitched cackle escaped his lips, and he scampered in a circle, tail invisible but very much implied. Villagers gasped as he leapt over a cooking pot and howled, "The meat is mine. I saw it first." Children laughed. One even clapped necks. He tossed aside the hyena mask and picked up another, this one shaped like a thundercloud. When he wore it, his voice boomed. "Why do you ignore the sky? The rain spirits cry because you no longer dance." Boom! A thunderclap split the air. Clouds gathered overhead. Eshu pulled off the mask and tossed it back. Now he moved faster, dancing from mask to mask, spirit to spirit, mimicking, mocking, celebrating. His body shifted and twisted. He became old, then young, fierce, then meek. The entire ancestral pantheon spun through him like a whirlwind. The villagers stared in stunned silence. Then something changed. He picked up a mask not meant to be touched. It was carved from dark wood streaked with ash. its teeth long and thin. A cursed mask, the forgotten one. The moment it touched his skin, a sharp wind blew through the village. Trees groaned. A low hum echoed from beneath the ground. Eshu's limbs stiffened. His grin faltered. A shadow rose behind him, massive, horned, faceless. The mask had awakened a spirit too long ignored, too bitter to forgive. Eshu yanked the mask off and threw it away, but the spirit remained. It moved silently through the air, drifting toward the villagers. The children cried. The elders chanted frantically in a language their tongues barely remembered. The sky darkened as if the sun had dipped into the ocean. Eshu, the young boy, shouted, "What did you do?" "I brought the story back," Eshu said, panting. "Now we must finish it." He reached into his robe and pulled out his own mask, a simple black one, unpainted, but ancient. The mask of the crossroads. He slipped it on. The shadow halted. The air shimmered. Eshu stepped forward. "You were forgotten. I remember you. I honor you." The shadow pulsed. Slowly, it drew back into the carved mask. Silence fell again. Then, a small drumbeat. Dum-dum. Then another. A woman began to sing. A man joined in. Children danced. The stories returned, trembling but alive. Eshu handed the crossroads mask to the young boy. "It's yours now, but I don't know how to use it." "You will," Eshu said, "when you listen." With that, Eshu tipped his hat, took a sip from his gourd, and vanished down the path, the sound of his laughter trailing like a breeze. Behind him, the village of masks remembered who they were. The jungle hummed with the subtle breathing of life as the moon crept over the treetops, casting a pale silver sheen upon the world below. Crickets chirped, leaves rustled in the nocturnal rhythm of an ancient land, and somewhere in the distance, the haunting cry of a night bird sliced through the air like a forgotten memory. Eshu stood at the edge of a glade, barefoot on damp earth, draped in a loose cloth the color of charcoal and shadow. His staff leaned casually against his shoulder, carved with cryptic symbols, and his eyes sharp, dark, playful were fixed on the path ahead. He had been walking for days now. Or perhaps it was weeks. Time was always elusive in realms where the divine walked beside mortals. The path beneath him was real and not real. A winding trail of red dust and thick roots that only appeared when he chose to see it. He was heading toward the village of the drowned moon, a place few dared approach, even in dreams. It was said that there, under the mirrored gaze of a lake that refused to ripple, lay a truth no one wished to carry. And of course, that was exactly where Eshu felt most drawn as he stepped into the clearing. A group of children playing with stones paused mid-game to look up at him. They didn't speak, only watched. One girl, no more than 6 or 7, with hair like coiled thread and eyes as wide as moons, pointed at his feet. "You're bleeding," she said quietly. Eshu looked down. A thin trail of blood traced the arch of his foot. He hadn't noticed it, but it didn't surprise him. The land extracted its toll in strange ways when the trickster passed. He smiled and lifted a finger to his lips. "Shh," he said. "The path must drink too." The children didn't laugh. They scattered into the trees, vanishing like mist. Alone again, Eshu walked toward the center of the clearing where a giant baobab tree loomed. Its trunk split in the middle as though cleaved by lightning. Within its crevice sat an old woman grinding something in a stone bowl. Her hands were stained a deep red. Her back was bent like a river bending around a rock, and her head was wrapped in a cloth decorated with cowrie shells and dried bones. She did not look up as he approached. "You've come late," she said, not pausing her work. "I come when I'm meant to," Eshu replied. "And the river flows when it pleases." she muttered. Still, the moon waits for no fool. He chuckled, circling the baobab tree slowly, tracing his fingers along the bark. Are you calling me a fool, wise woman? I'm calling you what you are, she said, glancing at him with eyes that were both blind and all-seeing. A bringer of riddles, a spiller of ink, a whisperer at doors. And you, Eshu said, stopping before her, are the keeper of masks. She lifted the pestle and placed it gently beside the bowl. The silence that followed was thick, almost sacred. Then she reached inside her bundle and pulled out a mask. It was small, carved from a single piece of wood, painted black and white, with a red tongue protruding from the mouth. The mask seemed to shimmer in the moonlight, as though alive. This, she said, is the face you must wear when you reach the lake. Eshu took the mask, feeling the weight of it in his hand. It was light, but there was something old about it, something that smelled like forgotten songs and ancient mistakes. What will it show me? He asked. What you hide, she answered, and what you've always been running from. He looked at her carefully. And what is that? She leaned forward, her voice now barely a whisper. Your origin. The word hung between them like a suspended blade. Eshu, the trickster, the one who danced at crossroads and laughed in the faces of kings, rarely paused. But now he did. He held the mask close to his chest, then placed it gently in his satchel. I'll wear it when I must, he said. You'll wear it when the moon demands, she replied, already returning to her grinding. Eshu turned away from the baobab and resumed his walk. The jungle thickened around him, vines looping from trees like hanging arms, frogs croaking hymns of old. The ground became soft, almost spongy, and the air was thick with humidity. The moon overhead grew brighter, as if it too was watching him. Closely, he passed a series of stones arranged in spirals, an ancient symbol that meant nothing and everything. He touched each one as he passed, murmuring words in languages that had not been spoken for 1,000 years. Ahead, the trees opened into a circular grove, and in the center lay the lake of the drowned moon. It was utterly still, no ripple touched its surface, though the breeze brushed Eshu's face. It was like glass, smooth and perfect, reflecting the moon above so precisely it looked like a hole in the world. No birds called, no insects sang. The silence was suffocating. Eshu approached the water's edge, knelt, and removed the mask from his satchel. He held it in both hands and slowly, deliberately, placed it upon his face. The moment it touched his skin, the world shimmered, colors inverted. The sky darkened to violet, the trees shimmered with gold, and the lake began to churn not with water, but with voices. They rose from the depths, thousands of them, speaking all at once in a chaos of sound. Cries of joy, whispers of betrayal, the sharp laugh of children, the moan of the dying. Eshu's body tensed, but he stood still, letting the mask do its work. Suddenly, the lake burst upward. A figure emerged from the water, not dripping wet, but cloaked in mist. It was tall, faceless, and held a mirror in its hand. It did not speak. Eshu stepped forward. What do you show me? He asked. The figure lifted the mirror. Eshu saw not his reflection, but the image of a boy sitting alone, on a stone, weeping. His hair was braided, his body thin, his eyes filled with confusion. Around him stood silhouettes, elders, spirits, strangers pointing, arguing, accusing. The boy was him. The boy had always been him. He stumbled backward, heart pounding. The mask tightened on his face like it had fused with his flesh. I am not him anymore, he muttered. But the lake whispered back. You are, and you always were. The image shifted Eshu now in a palace, spinning lies to a king, then in a market, stealing bread and leaving gold, then in a desert, leading the lost in circles until they laughed. Trickery, chaos, comedy, but always to mask the boy on the stone. He fell to his knees. Then, without warning, the lake calmed. The figure vanished. The moon returned to its original glow, and the mask loosened from his face. He took it off and stared at it. The red tongue was gone. Only a closed mouth remained. The keeper of masks had been right. He had seen what he feared most. Not death, not punishment. The sun hung low, as if weary from its daily journey across the sky. The golden horizon shimmered above the edge of the savannah, casting long shadows over the cracked earth and whispering grasses. Trees stretched their limbs like ancient beings, rousing from slumber, while animals, some known, some only whispered about in stories, stilled at the coming change. An odd hush fell, deep and resonant. It was not the silence of peace, but the silence of anticipation. Anansi stood on the path carved by time and tale, the old woven bag of tricks slung over his shoulder. Round his neck dangled the fragment of mirror he had earned in the village of echoes, still faintly glowing from its final wordless truth. His body bore new scars, one fresh across his forearm from the thorn beast, another across his ankle where the river spirits had clung, but his eyes gleamed sharper than ever. He was no longer simply a trickster. He was becoming a reckoner. Before him loomed the obsidian court, a ring of dark, jagged stone rising from the earth like shattered teeth. The air here was thick with story, not the kind found in songs or carved onto drums, but older ones. Stories that remembered when gods and beasts still bargained openly, and masks were not for hiding, but for revealing. It was here that the trial of masks would take place. Every true trickster, if they lasted long enough on the path, was called to this place. Not all arrived. Fewer still returned. The court did not punish. It revealed. And what it revealed was not always pleasant to carry forward. As Anansi stepped into the circle, the world shifted. The trees bent backward, as though pushed away by unseen hands. The sun froze. Wind refused to enter. All things living stood still. The earth spoke. You come with stories, Anansi. The voice boomed from the very ground, deep and grating. But here, we listen only to truths. Anansi's mouth, quick and clever, opened to respond but found no words. Not yet. Instead, he knelt at the edge of the stones, pressing his palm to the warm earth, a gesture of respect. I do not seek to lie, he whispered, but even truth can wear many faces. At that, the stones shifted. From their cracks rose 10 figures, each cloaked in heavy, dark robes and bearing a mask. No two were alike. One was the face of a weeping child, another a horned beast, a third an elder with closed eyes, a fourth a featureless blank. They surrounded Anansi in silence. Their presence was not hostile, nor welcoming. It was simply watching. The mask with the weeping child spoke first. You claim to walk the path of the trickster. Then you know, a trick unchallenged is merely mischief, but a trick weighed is a mirror. Another masked the blank one continued. You will wear the faces of your own deeds. You will be judged not by your intentions, but by what the world became because of you. Anansi swallowed hard. Then give me the masks, he said, standing tall. Let me wear what I have wrought. The ground opened, and from it emerged a small, simple box carved from ebony wood. No lock, no hinge. It opened by knowing. Anansi touched it gently, and it unfolded like a flower. Inside lay 5 masks, each pulsed faintly. Each waited to be worn. The first mask, red and streaked with gold, was the face of hunger. Anansi picked it up, hesitating. As soon as it touched his skin, the world shifted again. Suddenly, he was back in the village of hollow pots, where the people had lost the art of growing food and instead traded memories for meals. Anansi, weeks earlier, had tricked the village chief into giving up his greatest memory in exchange for a seed that never sprouted. In doing so, he'd revealed the hoarded riches hidden in the chief's hut, sparking a revolt. Now, in the mask, he saw the same scene, but not from his eyes. He saw it from the widow who had begged for grain and found none. He felt her bones ache, her belly gnaw at itself. He saw the seed in her palm, worthless and dry. Then he saw her rise, and her voice cry out in rage. And the people listen. Anansi pulled off the mask, gasping. "That mask is yours," said the weeping child. "You brought pain, but also fire." The second mask glowed softly blue like twilight, the face of deceit. When Anansi placed it upon himself, the world cracked again. He stood in the court of the river spirits, where he had once convinced a grieving spirit mother to trade her sorrow for a promise of return. He had lied. The child would never return. The death was true, but the mother's mourning had ended. Her laughter returned, and the river had flowed sweet again. In the mask, Anansi saw the moment the mother learned the truth. Years later, the betrayal, the storm that came, the river's fury. He watched her grief, reborn and doubled. He tore the mask off. "This one burns," he said, voice raw. "And yet," said the blank mask, "it healed first." More masks awaited. The third was green, covered in fine cracks, the face of creation. The fourth was ivory white, with blood-red lines, the face of betrayal. The fifth was midnight black, no eyes, no mouth, the face of self. Each mask, when worn, shattered a new truth across Anansi's path. He saw moments of his own cowardice, disguised as cunning. He relived moments of tenderness twisted into selfishness. But he also saw quietly and without praise the joy he had kindled, the children he had amused, the wisdom hidden in his foolishness. By the time he had worn all 5 masks, Anansi stood trembling, barefaced. The masked judges watched. One by one, they turned inward, revealing their own faces. And what Anansi saw made him weep. Each judge had his own face, himself, different ages, different versions. The coward, the fool, the hero, the liar, the boy, the old man. The weeping child mask fell last, revealing Anansi as a child untouched by trickery, wide-eyed and earnest. "You are your own witness," the youngest Anansi said gently, "and your own trial." Then the circle of stones shivered and crumbled into sand. The trial of masks was complete, and Anansi had passed not by being flawless, but by facing the flawed truth fully. The moment Eshu stepped into the clearing, the world seemed to bend inward. The grass curled like scrolls, the trees leaned forward as if to listen, and even the breeze halted mid-whisper. It was here, at the edge of memory and possibility, that the labyrinth of stories waited, a realm older than the gods, spun from every tale ever spoken, dreamed, or forgotten. Only those who dared to seek the truth beneath truths were permitted entry. Eshu, with his sandals scuffed by paradox and cloak stitched from riddles, smirked knowingly. He was right on time, or terribly late. Both were equally true. The ground shimmered beneath his feet, and the entrance revealed itself not as a door, but a question. What is your name when no one is listening? Eshu grinned and replied, All of them. The answer, vague and perfect, split the air open. A spiral staircase of shifting glyphs and broken proverbs unfurled before him, and he descended without hesitation. This was no ordinary path. The steps changed depending on your mood. One moment they were carved from ivory, the next from cracked mud. They pulsed like heartbeats, throbbed with the rhythm of all the stories that had ever been told around a fire or whispered into cupped hands. Each step was a tale, each breath drawn here carried the weight of generations. At the bottom lay the first chamber, vast, hollow, echoing with tales that hadn't yet decided how they would end. Eshu could hear them arguing amongst themselves, fragments of myth jostling for place. A lion that wept for a mosquito, a calabash that birthed the moon, a mother who became rain. These were his kind of stories, ones with slippery morals and endings that looped back upon their beginnings. A figure emerged from the mist. It had no face but many voices, each one a dialect from a different corner of the continent. Why have you come, trickster? It asked. To listen, Eshu replied. And what will you do with what you hear? Whatever makes the most trouble. The figure chuckled dozens of laughs from dozens of stories and gestured for him to follow. Eshu was led down corridors where tales walked beside him, sometimes reaching out to tug at his sleeves, sometimes trying to whisper secrets into his ears. One told of a hunter who became his own shadow. Another told of a mask that remembered all who had worn it. Eshu collected each one, folding them into the folds of his mind, letting their meanings unravel slowly. But the labyrinth was not merely a gallery. It tested you. One chamber forced him to relive every lie he had ever told. Another made him witness every consequence. Yet he moved through with ease, not because he lacked regret, but because he understood its place. For Eshu, every lie told opened a new path. Every misdirection was a chance to reroute the future. The central chamber was different. It pulsed like a living thing, its walls stitched from languages now extinct. In the center stood a tree, not of bark and leaf, but of story. Its branches carried sagas. Its roots drank deeply from silence. This was the story tree, the axis of the labyrinth, the wellspring from which all myths flowed. Eshu approached it and pressed his palm to its trunk. It shivered under his touch, recognizing the one who danced between words. The tree responded by blooming a single fruit, a gourd shaped like a question mark. Eshu opened it, and inside was a memory he hadn't yet lived. In it, he was old, forgotten, his tales reduced to footnotes, his mischief misunderstood. Yet even in that future, a child laughed at the mention of his name. That was enough. He turned, and standing behind him was a child made of ink and imagination. You're not real, Eshu said. The child shrugged. Neither are you. They laughed together, and in that laughter, the labyrinth pulsed with renewal. Stories shifted, adapting, rewriting themselves. The trickster had fed the tree, and the tree had gifted him a future. Eshu exited the labyrinth not through a door, but through a story. He stepped into a market square that hadn't existed moments before. Around him were storytellers, young and old, recounting the tales he had heard inside. Only now, they had new endings, endings he had inspired. He tossed his head back and laughed, the sound scattering into 1,000 echoes. The path ahead grew dim, even though the sun still hung high in the sky. An eerie twilight spread across the land, casting the trees in long, stretched silhouettes that quivered with unnatural movement. The wind had stopped whispering through the branches, and not even a bird dared to sing. The trickster still wearing the lion's tooth around his neck and carrying the blessing of the river goddess, walked cautiously forward into the gloom. He knew the stories whispered around fires by the elders, stories of the shadowlands where spirits wandered without memory, where one's own past could rise and strike like a serpent. But there was no turning back. If he wished to reach the final shrine and win the gift that would save his people, he had to pass through the realm where light had forgotten its name. He stepped between two colossal trees, whose trunks twisted together like lovers locked in a silent quarrel, and the air instantly changed. It was heavier now, thick with grief and doubt. The leaves above him curled inward as if recoiling from some invisible pain. At first, there was nothing but silence. Then came a sound of soft dragging, like someone pulling a broken basket along the dirt. The trickster stopped, his fingers curled round the carved wooden staff given to him by the winekeeper. He called out, "Who walks with me?" From the shadows emerged a figure. At first glance, it looked like a boy, no older than 10. But when the trickster looked into the boy's face, he saw his own eyes staring back. The child smiled, a sad, broken thing. "I am who you were," the boy whispered. The trickster felt a chill deep in his bones. He remembered the hunger, the long nights of crying beneath his mother's mat, the laughter he had to fake when his father disappeared for weeks, the lies he told himself just to stay alive. "You are my past," he said softly. The child nodded. "You left me behind, but I never left you. Do you blame me?" The child's face hardened. Would it matter? The trickster had no answer. He kept walking, the child following silently behind. Shadows grew denser now, coiling like smoke around his feet. From the mist emerged a woman tall, draped in mourning cloth. Her face was hidden, but her presence hit him like thunder. It was his mother. Not truly her, of course. She was long gone, taken by fever during the drought. But this spirit had her posture, her voice, her breath. "You never came back," she said, her voice thin as silk. "You promised." "I had to run," he replied, choking back a lump. "I was starving." "You still lied." The trickster clenched his fists. "I was a child. Even children carry knives." The wind picked up again, stirring the dead leaves across the ground. The spirits were testing him, unearthing every regret, every betrayal he tried to forget. He walked on. For every few steps he took, a memory came alive. A brother he stole from, a friend he abandoned, a village he tricked for food, leaving them to suffer famine. They all came, not with anger, but with questions. Why? Why me? Did we matter? And always the same answer: silence. The forest closed tighter. His breath fogged the air. Though it was not cold, a new figure stepped from the dark, a tall man, richly dressed, his skin glowing with a golden sheen. This one wore the trickster's adult face, but regal and sharp, like a king's reflection in a calm river. "I am who you pretend to be," the man said. "Then you are a lie," the trickster spat. "Am I? Or am I your dream?" The trickster paused. The man stepped closer. "You imagine you're on a noble journey, but aren't you still just trying to prove you matter? Still the boy hoping someone will clap for him? That's not true. Then why do you seek glory wrapped as salvation?" The trickster fell silent again. He sat on a large rock beneath the twisted trees. His shoulders sagged. The weight of all he had been, all he had failed to become, pressed down like a storm. He was not sure how long he sat like that, unmoving. Time was strange here. Then, a faint sound. Laughter. It came not from the spirits, but from within. He remembered something, a single moment from childhood, when he'd painted a lion's face on his brother's sleeping face using crushed berries. They'd laughed for days, even when their stomachs were empty. That memory bloomed, bright and defiant. For a second, the shadows trembled. He rose to his feet. "Yes," he said aloud. "I've lied. I've run. I've stolen and hurt. But I've also loved. I've wept for those I lost. I've tried, even when the world laughed at my trying." The boy behind him faded into light. The woman his mother smiled and vanished like morning mist. The man with the golden skin bowed his head and became wind. The forest began to brighten. The shadows receded, melting like wax in firelight. He had passed the trial, not by fighting, not by escaping, but by accepting. He walked forward, his step steadier. The path began to incline, revealing the glimmer of the final shrine far in the distance. And above it all, the sky sang. The stars shimmered across the night sky like scattered stories waiting to be told. Anansi stood at the edge of the great baobab tree. Its massive roots sprawled across the ground like sleeping beasts. The village lay just beyond the hill, flickering in the moonlight, unchanged and yet unfamiliar. It had been seasons, years, maybe since he last stepped foot on this soil. The scent of the earth, the distant sound of drumbeats, the soft rustle of leaves, it all tugged at something deep within his chest. But he was not the same boy who had once left this place in defiance and pride. He had walked through realms both physical and mythic, outwitted spirits, betrayed shadows, helped gods, and even tricked himself. His feet were dusted with the sands of desert illusions and the moss of forgotten forests. His heart held riddles, too heavy for mere mortals, and his mind buzzed with the echoes of the stories he had stolen, twisted, and made his own as he approached the village. Children's laughter wafted through the air like the scent of fire-roasted yams. He paused, realizing that his name had become a whisper among the people, one of fear, mischief, and awe. They still told tales of the trickster who stole sunlight, or the one who trapped the wind in a bottle. But those stories had drifted from who he truly was. An elder sat at the village gate, eyes half closed, carving shapes into a calabash bowl. She looked up as Anansi approached, and without surprise, she smiled. "So," she said softly, "the spider comes crawling home." I am no longer just a spider," Anansi replied. "No. Now you are a shadow with too many feet." She motioned for him to sit. They said nothing for a while. The village around them moved gently, like a story waiting to be awakened. It was as if the land itself breathed slower in his presence. "I thought returning would bring me peace," he confessed. "Peace?" The old woman chuckled. "Peace is a bowl that can only be filled by losing everything inside it." He looked at her with the weariness of 100 fables behind his eyes. "Then what is the point of all the trickery, the mischief, the journeys? Stories are never meant to answer questions," she said. "They only reveal the deeper ones." Later that night, the village gathered by the fireside. Word had spread the trickster had returned. Some watched him warily, others with awe, and the children leaned forward, hungry for a tale. Anansi stood, not as a deceiver, but as a weaver of meaning. He spun no web, only words. He began, "Once there was a spider who thought the world was foolish. So he set out to trick it into making sense." And as he spoke, his voice held no arrogance, only rhythm. The rhythm of walking far, of losing one's way, of finding pieces of yourself in the lies you tell. He spoke of the sky god's silence, of the riddles hidden in mirrors, of masks worn too long. He told them how he had once tried to steal wisdom but ended up drowning in it. How he had tricked death, but found loneliness harder to defeat. The fire crackled, shadows danced, and even the trees seemed to lean in. When he finished, the elder looked at him and said, "And now, Anansi said slowly, I want to listen." So for once, he stayed quiet as others shared their tales. The village had changed in his absence. New myths had sprouted. Young tricksters told stories of invisible goats and whispering wells. Anansi didn't correct them, didn't claim ownership. He merely listened. Later, alone by the baobab, a familiar voice spoke. It came from nowhere and everywhere. "You finally understand," the sky god said. Anansi looked up at the stars. "Do I? You have walked the path of mischief and returned with humility. You are no longer just a trickster. You are a keeper." Anansi smiled. "And what does a keeper do?" The wind whispered. "He remembers what others forget." The stars above shifted, not in the sky, but in his mind. He realized then, stories were not meant to make sense. They were meant to be lived, passed on, and changed. Like the web he once wove, every thread touched another. He lay under the baobab tree, listening to the heartbeat of the land, not as a hero, not as a villain, but as someone who had walked far enough to finally return.